Assalamu alaikum everyone. We are going to be beginning in 5 minutes, inshallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you. I was waiting for a response, actually. My name is Heba. I am your MC for today. And some housekeeping items for those of you who don't know. The washrooms are on this side. We have volunteers who are available in case you need anything during the seminar. And the seminar is scheduled until 4 p.m. We have 2 breaks in the middle, one at around 2, one around 3:15, and we have refreshments at the end, inshallah. So I wanted to start off and to welcome everyone. Now, if this is your first time coming to Seekers Hub Toronto, actually this location, raise your hand. Oh, okay, mashallah, that's a good number of people. So thank you for joining us today. So I wanted to give a brief introduction about Seekers Hub Toronto. What is Seekers Hub Toronto, actually? So other than it being a second home for myself and many others here, it is a unique learning foundation that connects between transformative knowledge and spirituality with community service and spiritual engagement. So Seekers Hub Toronto provides a wide spectrum of learning opportunities as well as spiritual activity. And all of this is designed in a way to meet the diverse needs of individuals in the community. Another important thing that I wanted to mention about Seekers Hub Toronto is that all of our programs and activities are provided free of cost, and they are delivered by qualified and trained teachers and scholars. So today's seminar is actually one of those free programs. So today's seminar is entitled, Why Adopt? The Urgency, Virtues, and Practical Steps to Adoption. I wanted to read something for you here that I read actually this morning. About the seminar. Adoption is a neglected religious duty and an emphasized communal obligation. Now, how many of you did not know that before at some point in time in their life? Okay, good, because I didn't know as well. So it's very unfortunate, but alhamdulillah that we're here today to learn about this. And despite the Prophet's emphasis on the urgency and reward of adopting, unfortunately, many Muslims are wary about adoption. Some of them think, well, no, adoption is un-Islamic. Others think there's just too many issues surrounding it, and others think that it's just too difficult to do. So today, Shaykh Faraz Rabbani will be teaching us that religiously, adoption is highly encouraged and it's an obligation. And the second thing is, okay, practically, how does one go about adopting? Okay, so finally, and most importantly, I'd like to introduce Shaykh Faraz Rabbani, and it's actually a great honor for me to introduce him because of his guidance and teachings. They were a means for me to get clarity on a lot of things that I was uncertain about in my life. So Shaykh Faraz Rabbani is the scholar in residence here at Seekers Hub Toronto, and he is the executive director of Seekers Hub Global. And Seekers Hub Global is the online platform of Seekers Hub. Shaykh Faraz spent his childhood in Canada, England, Egypt, and Spain, and then afterwards came back here to finish his high school and university studies. So while completing his bachelor's of economics and commerce, Shaykh Faraz developed a deep interest in Islamic learning while he studied under local scholars. And after he graduated from the University of Toronto, him and his wife, Ustadha Shireen Ahmed, traveled to Damascus and Amman to study with a number of leading scholars. And in 2007, they came back here. And shortly after, Shaykh Faraz founded Seekers Hub to deal with the urgent need to spread Islamic knowledge online and on ground in a reliable, inspiring, relevant, and accessible manner. So I'm going to stop talking now, and without further ado, please, Shaykh Faraz Rabbani.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, we wanted to begin our look at why adopt by looking at the religious guidance related to adoption. And I wanted to look at this in two simple parts. The first is the urgency and virtues of adoption, and secondly, how to adopt. Some of the practical religious dimensions, some of the questions people often have about the religious guidelines and considerations, some of the things that would make someone be wary perhaps of adopting. So the first part is what is the religious ruling of adoption? Is it encouraged? And in this there is a great misconception. A lot of people will say that adoption is prohibited in Islam. And this is a mistake. Because as we will see, adoption has two levels of rulings in the Sharia. At the level of the individual, it is a praiseworthy act. It's considered a virtuous, praiseworthy act. It's considered mustahab. It is religiously praiseworthy. No one is obligated to adopt, but the act of adopting is an act that is pleasing to God and it is rewarded. It is pleasing to Allah Most High, and it is rewarded, as we'll see, for a number of considerations. So that's at the individual level. It's a highly praiseworthy act, and we'll be looking at specific texts of the Quran and from the teachings of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, regarding that. But that is not the only ruling with respect to adoption. Adoption also is a collective obligation. Adoption is also a collective obligation socially, because as Muslims we have two levels of responsibility, or two types of responsibility. We have what are called personal duties, and we have collective duties. Right? As individuals, right, there are certain things that we are personally responsible for. We are personally responsible to believe, to pray, to fast, to do what is lawful, to avoid what is prohibited, etc. There's a range of things that are personal duties. But those are not the only duties we have. As social beings, we also have what is called furudul kifaya, collective obligations, which is everything that safeguards the fundamental good, worldly and spiritual, in society. We share in the collective obligation for its fulfillment. Everything that upholds the collective good in all its aspects: social, economic, political, spiritual. Right? And these collective obligations, or these sometimes referred to as communal obligations, the fard al-kifaya, is just as obligatory as what is personally obligatory, except that not everyone has to fulfill every collective obligation, because we can't. The things that are required in society to uphold the good are numerous. However, as individuals, the least, what the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, referred to as being the least of faith, is that one must wish for the fulfillment of every social good and the prevention of every social harm. That is the least of faith, as we know from a number of sayings of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. But that is the least of faith. If in society there is any collective obligation that is not fulfilled, then everyone shares in the moral culpability and sin of its non-fulfillment. So if there are people who are poor and their need is not being attended to, right, of the alleviation of poverty, then that is a non-fulfillment of a collective obligation. If there are people who are oppressed or marginalized and there are not sufficient people that are taking the means to address that, there is collective culpability as well. And numerous examples exist. Even in our classical texts, they mention, for example, that if in the marketplace people develop a bad practice with respect to how they bring animals for slaughtering to the market, if people bring, the jurist mentioned, if people bring chickens in cages that are too constrained, there's too many chickens in the cage, then the person who does that is individually culpable, but there's a collective obligation that be addressed. Right? So that's, and some of these, of course, this is part of the role of government as well, to ensure that these things are taken care of, but there is a societal duty for everybody, because the government can't and won't do everything, right? And the government is not a substitute for this sense of collective obligation. Right? And there's many other examples related to that. And amongst these is that if there are children in need of someone to take care of them and to raise them, such that without that their needs and interests and well-being would not be properly attended to, then this too is a collective obligation, which if unfulfilled, there is a shared collective sin in its non-fulfillment. Right? So adoption, there's a personal ruling and a collective ruling, unequivocally. Right? The source of confusion is very straightforward. A lot of people will say, well, adoption is prohibited in Islam. Right? But there's two distinct things. The adoption that is prohibited is a very particular type of adoption, right? Which is, and for a number of wisdoms, it is prohibited, which is where someone ascribes a child to themselves as being their own child and negates their being the child of someone else, right? And that is not permitted. And there's a number of wisdoms with respect to that. But that's a particular expression of adoption. You make that child yours and say, you don't have any other parents. I'm your child and I'm your parent, and that's it. However, what is not just permitted but praiseworthy and a collective obligation is what in the Sharia is referred to as kafala, which is guardianship, right? Which is both highly recommended and is in fact a social obligation. And there's distinctions between the two. In guardianship, the role of the adopting parent is that they have taken on the responsibility and the authority as well, because they have to make decisions on behalf of the child, of raising the child, taking care of their best interests, etc. And as the Quran makes clear, one treats them as part of one's family, right? And that is highly encouraged. And the basis of both the limitation and permission of this is actually from the prophetic practice itself, because the verses related to the prohibition of a certain type of adoption relate to someone the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself had adopted. Who initially, the Arabs, if they adopted someone, they'd name their own. So Zayd ibn Haritha was referred to as Zayd ibn Muhammad. But he was adopted by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. When the command came to refer to them, to ascribe them to their own parents, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, did not disavow Zayd, but he was now simply ascribed to be the child of his actual parents, but he continued to be under the guardianship of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. In fact, he was given the option of, when he was older, he was given the option: do you wish to remain with him, or do you wish to go back to your own parents? And that choice was given to Zayd. May Allah be pleased with him. And he chose the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, right? And and from that we see the distinct role between a parent and a guardian. So the permissible adoption, right? It does not, guardianship doesn't affirms actual parents and lineage. The child would in normal conditions would, if the parents are known, when they reach the right age, etc. And there's no defined age when they must be told. It's not once they hit 4 they must know, or when they're 7 or they're 10, 12. Depends on the circumstances, culture, context, norms, what makes sense in the particular circumstances. Right? So it affirms actual parentage and lineage. Right? And there are some legal distinctions from biological children with respect to some of the derivative rulings with respect to interaction and so on, right? Which we will look at in the second part. Right? And that's it. Right? But these are derivative rulings in that the underlying imperative to adopt, right, socially, right, that this is something that should concern a believer, that there are children in need of families that would take care of their well-being and would raise and nurture them. That is the governing criterion. Okay? Which is why if we step back and look at the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, there are tremendous merits that are mentioned with respect to adoption, to kafala. Right? Firstly, in a broader context, it is not an accident that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself, the final Prophet, was sent an orphan. Right? He was sent an orphan. And there's spiritual wisdoms in that, etc. But that is an example for us to consider. Secondly, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself adopted. He himself adopted. And though that adoption, because the Arabs had, and it led to a lot of trouble. The Arabs, when they adopted, they called the child theirs, and once you've adopted the child would no longer have any relationship with their actual biological parents. And that led to all kinds of harms. Sometimes it actually led to wars between tribes. Because they said, no, that's our child. Said, no, we've raised him. What are we going to do? Let's fight it out. Okay? That's dramatic, but the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself adopted initially as his, but then that was adjusted as guardianship. And then there are numerous encouragements of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, with respect to guardianship. And this was encouraged both with respect to boys and with respect to girls. Why? Because one of the things in Arab society at that time, a lot of people would adopt a son because it made a lot of sense. The son will earn for you. The son is a source of wealth. So if you don't have a son, adopt and you have a son. The Romans used to do the same too. If a ruler didn't have a child, adopt someone you like as your son and they can continue after you. But the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, highly encouraged adoption in general, but also emphasized the particular merits of adopting girls as well, because that was something many people say, well, girls are a hassle, girls this and that, and the Arabs had many problematic attitudes with respect to girls. So one of the texts, and this is related in some of the most rigorous sources in Sahih Muslim, for example, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Man ala jariyatain hatta tablugha jaa yawm al-qiyamah ana wa huwa." Right? وَضَمَّ أَصَابِعَهُم. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, whoever takes care of and raises two young girls until they reach adulthood, they will come on the day of resurrection, and I'll be with them. And I'll be with them. And then he brought two fingers close together. That's how close they'll be, referring to the great, tremendous reward. This is he pointed out this because that was something, that was a category that there was a great neglect of, of girls who were in need of adoption. And that was an imbalance. Of course, the scholars deduce from it as well that one pays particular attention to those categories of orphans that are more likely to be neglected. Right? That are more likely to be neglected. Right? And in general, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, also mentioned that whoever takes care of an orphan, whoever becomes the guardian of an orphan, kafilul yatim, lahu aw li ghayrihi, on their behalf or on behalf of another, I and they will be like these two in paradise. And he brought two fingers close together, okay? Referring to the tremendous reward in general of raising an orphan. Right? And this has come in many, many other hadiths. We won't go into all the specific details regarding them, but this is a category that he highly encouraged. Peace and blessings be upon him. Right? And those are some of the specific merits. Right? And the scholars from that also deduce this aspect of looking at what are categories that are neglected. But this goes back, if we step back to a wider consideration, right? That adoption relates to the purpose of religion. Because what is the purpose of religion? We know from clear texts of both the Quran and the teachings of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that the best of the servants of God are those who are of most benefit to the servants of God. خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of people are those of greatest benefit to others. The best of people are those of most benefit to others. Allah is in the aid of His servant as long as His servant is in the aid of others. To the extent that you're in assistance of others, to that extent, God is in your assistance. Right? Whoever relieves from another a distress of the distresses of this life, Allah relieves from them distress in this life and the next. Right? And all these general texts of being of benefit to others, being a source of relief for others, right? All of them apply to adoption. Right? And all the texts of being of assistance to those in need. It is also, of course, one of the qualities that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself was deeply praised for. Right? He was referred to by his uncle that ثِمَالُ الْيَتَامَ عِصْمَةٌ لِلْأَرَامِلِ. Right? He is the caretaker of orphans and the protector or the carer for widows. And the carer of widows. Right? And that's one of the distinguishing qualities of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And he laid out so many general teachings that even if you can't adopt a child, then assist those who are taking care of children. Spending on orphans, assisting those who are widowed, others who are disadvantaged. Right? That this is of the best of works. This is of the best of works. And even more broadly, because the Arabs and other societies, which are based on very tight-knit families and on tribal systems, if you're an orphan, you're cut off. Even the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, within his own family, his own adopting uncle, who raised him, Abu Talib, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, asked for his daughter's hand in marriage before revelation, and he was refused. Even though his uncle said, "You're the best of people, but I can't marry her to you." Why? Because socially, despite everything else, he was considered an orphan. But the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, came to dispel that. And he encouraged socially to spend on orphans, to express love of orphans. And there's many specific texts, that if you see an orphan, go and pat them on the head. But it's not just sort of a token. Okay, today go hit a pat orphan, move on. But that you express love and care for an orphan. Never look at them with a look of scorn or disregard, etc. And as the Quranic ethos is, that treat them as your own brothers and sisters. Right? That is the underlying ethos. But then, that's in general. But there's also a practical reality that must be considered. Right? That if we look at all that, but then you look at reality, that given the reality of there being so many orphans, and sometimes people imagine orphans are something that are found somewhere overseas, right? That they're Syrian orphans because of what's taking place in Syria. That is true, but not just. That, they're orphans in such and such country. But that's a secondary consideration. We have circles of responsibility. We have circles of responsibility. The fact that they are children, right, in need of care. And we can see some of the statistics related to that. Right? Whether they be Muslim children, Muslim orphans, orphans from Muslim families or from other families. Right? The presence of such orphans in need of guardians. Right? This is, one must at the very least feel a sense of personal concern that this is a communal obligation, a fard kifaya. It's a communal, societal obligation that's not being fulfilled. That there are orphans in the Greater Toronto area, in Ontario, in Canada, who are in need of care. And there's an opportunity that this is a source of tremendous reward if you adopt. But it is also an obligation. The fact that they're not taken care of, or they're lacking care, right, then that's something that should trouble someone. If one can adopt oneself, there's tremendous merit in it. And if one cannot adopt, then at least to be part of raising awareness of it, of assisting in it, of facilitating in it, to even at a political level, to ensure that what are the issues related to children and adoption and their proper care and funding, etc., that this societal responsibility is being facilitated in the right way. To engage in because one's own situations may not facilitate for you to actually engage in that specific matter, but you can be part of its facilitation. And there's also, of course, in many cases, adoption, in the sense of guardianship, also takes care of a very personal consideration that many people have. Someone wants to have a child, which is that's a natural human urge, right? To have a child. And if one is not able to have a child, this is a means of one potential way of fulfilling that fulfilling that urge, that wish within. Whether if one doesn't have children, or one has had children, but one wants more, and it may be no longer possible to have more children, or for whatever reason, one can adopt. Okay? So this is also one of the ways to take care of that. Many people feel burdened, feel very affected by that, and this is one way of addressing that. So these are this is sort of the broader context of of adoption and its merit in our religion, and that's the first part of what I wanted to present. But before we continue on, any questions here?
Procedure for getting adoption. So they don't want to hear about kafala.
Who's they?
So in Algeria, for example, the process, they distinguish between kafala and adoption, and when kafala is used, they close.
Yeah, so many countries have limiting regulations with respect to adoption and so on, and there's many considerations. I mean, there's a whole number of reasons why a lot of countries are, for political reasons and also for social reasons, are wary of allowing people from overseas to adopt, right? So that's a reality, and that sometimes makes it challenging. For example, when people want to adopt a child from overseas, there are many limitations, because most countries have. If someone from overseas is going to adopt a child from Canada, then then part of the government's responsibility is to make sure that a Canadian citizen, if they go overseas, that their rights are going to be safeguarded, etc., etc., etc. And each society has its range of considerations that they hold to be significant, right? So there's an aspect of national identity and pride as well, that that we don't like the idea that Americans are adopting people from our country, and so there's many different aspects to it. There's also, of course, the challenges of differing legal systems in general, and in many Muslim countries, the interplay between what the laws are, in terms of the limits within the Sharia, which in many Muslim countries, just to varying extents, are considered in the law there vis-a-vis other countries. And then there's also the aspect of like basic national dignity. Like a lot of Muslim lands have been colonized and so on. So Algerians saying, okay, now the French, now you colonized us, you brutalized us, you did all this thing, now you're going to adopt our kids too? Like, no way. Right? Like, the basic aspect of, of a sense of national dignity as well. You, our erstwhile oppressors, are going to adopt our children. Right? So it's a matter of, there's a lot of local sensitivities, religiously, culturally, politically, that play into it as well. And then reality of there's abuse of the system, etc. There's a lot of fears, real and sometimes imagined, relating to it as well. So it can be a very challenging process, but there's people who know much more about that. They'll be addressing that, inshallah. But the praiseworthiness of adoption or guardianship is not limited to adopting a Muslim child, right? Or raising them for the whole period of time. Very often it can be for more limited periods of time as well. And it's also something to consider. It's not just a matter, one takes it as an opportunity, one considers the religious reward in it, and to be able to assist assist a child. And a lot of people suffer from empty nest syndrome and things like that, of those maybe slightly older than most of the people here. This is one way they can deal with that. You have time and energy, and you're retired, and you could take care of. So there's many things there to consider. And as a community, we're a young community still here in Canada, for example. We need to establish the community institutions that facilitate and raise awareness regarding this as well.
Perhaps you're planning on discussing this further in the presentation, I'm not sure, but the issues involved of becoming no parents, adopting children.
Yeah, so there's a number of practical issues and considerations. We'll look at those in a bit. Any questions with respect to what we've seen?
Shaykh Faraz, is it a matter of semantics? Here, when we talk about adoption, we refer to it as adoption. We don't refer to it necessarily as guardianship. If someone's going through the process, they say I'm going through the adoption process. They don't say I'm going through the guardianship process, for example, right? So is it a matter of semantics, number one? And number two, the prohibition of ascribing an adopted child to your own self, is it primarily due to like lineage?
Yeah, so one is there's no protection, there's no prohibition of the word adoption. There's no ayah that says la adopt. Like there's no, there's two different languages, right? So there's no argument about terminology. It's a basic principle of religious interpretation. La mushahata fil istilah. There's no argument about terminology. Okay? Though much of human argument is on the basis of terminology rather than meanings. Right? As Imam al-Ghazali points out, that people argue about words, but what matters are meanings. Right? So what is prohibited is, there's something that is prohibited and there's something that's permitted. Right? So the term adoption can refer to a range of ways of taking responsibility for a child. Right? And broadly, if you step back, the idea of you taking care of a child that is not yours and taking responsibility for raising it, this is a tremendous spiritual work and a communal obligation. There are some guiding considerations for it. So someone called that, whatever they called it, you can come up with your own terminology. So if this is the terminology, that's not an issue. Right? There are governing constraints that, as a Muslim, who one would be religiously, morally bound to uphold those, even within the context of a broader legal framework that one is operating under. And most of those, one has the discretion. There's a lot of discretionary rights with respect to that. So that's not. And here, of course, there's a broader issue, right? That what is religion itself? Right? The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, defined religion itself is sincere concern, ad-dinu nasiha, that you care for the good of others. Even more so, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in the rigorously authentic statement said, none of you believes until they wish for others of the good that they wish for themselves. Right? So if someone is lacking some type of basic human good that they have a right to, then one, the very least of it is one wishes it for them, and the strong believer is the one who's able to take the means to fulfilling that. And even more so, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, referred to numerous texts that the one who does not have concern for the poor, the destitute, the hungry, for any category of people who are in need, right? Whatever the type of need is, he equated that with a lack of faith, which is a natural corollary of the previous matters. Right? So that is the governing thing, that if one steps back, is it called adoption, is it called guardianship? The underlying concern is that if there are children in need of families in which they can be raised, taken care of, someone who is taking responsibility for their their best interests, as in the absence of their actual parent, who takes the role of a parent, that is clearly a highly encouraged at a personal level and collectively an obligation. There are religious dimensions to this. There are religious dimensions to this that one needs to keep in mind, right? That one needs to keep in mind, which sometimes cause people to shy away from adoption, right? What are some of these? Why would someone say, I don't want to adopt? So let's leave aside the issue of adoption versus guardianship, right? So just what are some reasons? And I know we have people who have adopted here, but why would people feel wary about adopting? You'd raise one issue, which is?
Becoming a milk parent, and as a child gets older, a parent, an adopted parent of the opposite sex, there are issues.
Yeah. So
how can becoming a milk parent?
So firstly, becoming a milk parent is not a requirement. Right? It's not a requirement, right? One can be a guardian to a child who's older. It's very possible, right? So that's not itself a requirement. One can adopt a child, like if there's a 9-year-old child in need of a family that will take care of, one could become guardians of that child. It's not the praiseworthiness of kafala, of the guardianship of a child, or adoption of a child, is not something that you can only adopt a child when they're small. It applies to anyone who's still in need. They say, okay, the scholars of Islamic law like asking hypothetical questions. What if they're no longer legally a child? Right? In the sense that they have hit puberty, but they need a family to take care of them, because while they may be biologically no longer a child now, but they're still socially they're not yet a mature adult, right? I don't like the term youth, but they're adults in training, so they need someone to be taking care of them. So can you? Yes. Now, how do you do it? Right? How do you do it? There are certain limits which we'll look at, but those are not exclusionary limits. Those are limits that one can work with and around. Can work with and around. One of them is to adopt more than one child, for example. Right? To adopt more than one child. That's one way of doing that. Like, for example, if someone wants to adopt, like, for example, a couple, or even let's say, in case there's a single Muslim woman, for whatever reason, divorced, separated, husband widowed, unmarried, she wants to adopt. There's no prohibition in our religion from her doing so. One simple way is to adopt more than one child. That's one way that would avoid these limits, right? There is another option, which is you could nurse the child when they're still below the age of 2 or 2.5, and that's one way that would circumvent. That's not necessarily the only way, because if you don't have a child, etc., then there's practical biological considerations that arise from that. So that's one way of addressing it. Right? The limits of interaction can be dealt with in a number of other ways as well. Right? And that's partly where, so one way is by adopting more than one child, for example. Right? The other is to have their simple guidelines, right? That what is prohibited with respect to, for example, being alone in an enclosed, what's called in fiqh, what's referred to as khalwa, is being secluded with one adult person of the opposite sex. That refers to in a closed room, right? in a closed room. That can be dealt with where, but if there's other people around, etc., the living room area, etc., that does not fall under the prohibition, right? And if one deals with that, like before the child hits adulthood, well, go adopt another child. There's a number of ways that can be worked around depending on people's particular circumstances, right? I know of a Muslim woman who had one adopted son, and she adopted him when he was like slightly older. Now, as a teenager, she became Muslim. Some people said, you have to leave him. I said, no. They went to Imam Majid, who is former president of Islam. I said, no, these are broad said criteria. Like, don't go to sleep on his bed. Common sense things. But they're in the there's ways to work around many of these things. And she ended up adopting another child who's much smaller, and that took care of some of those considerations. What are other issues that arise that make people wary of adoption? Financial burden. That's not a religious consideration. That's a financial consideration. Can you afford adoption? Well, that's not a religious consideration, right? I mean, the religious consideration would be don't make a commitment that you cannot fulfill, right? But the way adoption is set up, you have to establish that you are able to afford it, right? Because you can't go and just pick up a child and say, I've adopted this child. There's a legal process, and it's a very sensible, if possibly frustrating, legal process, but for a good reason, because the authorities have a responsibility to ensure that the fundamental interests of the child are protected. Yeah, inheritance, and again, there is. Firstly, yes, first things first, right? Inheritance, something happens once you die, right? So you take care of that, but when you're raising the kid, they're not going to die immediately. Well, you're not going to die, hopefully, immediately, right? So that's something you factor in, but it is not the basis of, it's not the be-all and end-all, right, of that. Now, when it comes to inheritance, and every Muslim should have a will to make sure that that their wealth is distributed, in sound ways, but we have discretion on our wealth, on what we leave behind, of 1/3 of what we leave behind. And they say that if you raise it, and of course the range of possibilities with respect to adoption and guardianship are many. You're not necessarily raising the child for the whole duration necessarily. I have a friend of mine in England had 4 girls that they kept for for different range of time, because the mother was going through a hard time and they needed a family that would raise the girls. Last I checked, 2 of them were still with them, because the mother actually said, can you guys please raise them, because they're doing really well. And I don't want to go into long, but there's different cases. But if one raises a child as one's own, etc., one can and should incorporate them as part of one's bequest, right? And the nature of inheritance is that it gets divided up anyways, and so they can get of one's bequest, right? And that's one. And then there's another aspect, of course, which is when it comes to inheritance, there is discretion for the inheritors as well, right? That the inheritors can agree that, well, we all agree, although when push comes to shove and there's money involved, people generally will push and shove, right? So people don't surrender their rights very easily, right? Even when you might hope that they won't, right? It's one of those sensitive conversations with parents and so on, that a lot of people have wishful thinking that, well, we'll sort it out. There's $1 million home, $1.5 million home, $500,000 home involved, and a few middle-aged siblings, a lot of pushing and shoving, is likely to take place, right? So those things, but that's a separate matter that we'll try to address. So yeah, one can factor them into one's inheritance through defining, them in one's bequest, and that can be revised. Let's say a few years down, you realize that you're not able to be their guardian. And you moved on, you lived another 30, 40 years. You don't have to keep them in that. And that's how, a child whose guardianship you take, it is also very possible that that you might not remain their guardian parent as opposed to their. You cannot deny the parent, your biological children, but someone else could become their guardian instead, right? But although what's best is that if you are able to, that you follow through with it. Right? It's a serious commitment to make, and once you make a commitment, you follow through on it. Any other issues that arise? Those are some of the most common religious concerns that people have. So you don't have to adopt. Adoption is not limited by getting them in that period when you can still nurse them. Someone, so how is a 60-year-old woman going to nurse a child? And someone who's older, their kids have gone to university, etc. We just recently moved away from my parents. So I know my mother's doing all this gardening. I said, what's going on? He says, well, there's no children to take care of now. I'm not exactly a child. I was living next door to my parents. Recently moved, just down the road. But no children to take care of. They're really feeling that. Even though technically my brother lives with them too, but it just, it's only partial emptiness. I said, so why are you so stressed? I said, well, he'll move out next. I said, he's hit 30, he's still with you, don't worry, right? But, so one of the options there, and it's not a requirement that one nurse. So there's a range of circumstances. Any other? So basically, there are a number of religious considerations that the child is not. It's not the same legally as a biological child. A biological child, you can't just hand over discretion. Although you could actually give guardianship of your child to someone else. But both religiously, there are parameters for that. Right? Like if you can't just say, okay, just hand them over. You are assumed responsible for your own children, right? And there should be a due process. But informally, some people do it, and formally, it's possible. But they remain your child. Right? A child whose guardianship you take, they don't become your child in the sense of lineage, in the sense of inheritance, lineage, but you can still refer to them as your child. Other questions that arise, can you give them your last name? And the answer is yes. The difference between last name and lineage. Lineage is saying, so-and-so is my biological child, full stop. And we know that from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself. When he was in Mecca, the disbeliever, the Meccans came to his uncle, and they tried to strike a deal. Because they couldn't just kill him, because in a tribal society, if you kill someone who's part of from one of the clans, but part of the same tribe, the clans are all going to break into war with each other. So they try to strike a deal. That how about we give you one of our children, and you give us your child, your son. So his uncle, who was actually not Muslim, Abu Talib, he said, that's strange. You want me to give up, you want me to take care of one of your children, one of your sons, so that I take care of him, and to give you my son so that you kill him? I said, do you really think I'll do that? But he was referred to as his son in the broader sense, and there's nothing wrong with that. To give them the same last name, and there's a lot of practical considerations for that. In many countries, if you travel, they'll actually check for in identification, who's the child, etc. There's a possibility, especially with foreigners in many countries, they're very wary of what foreigners are up to. So someone has a different name, that how they're, there's practicalities involved. You can refer to them as your child, your son, your daughter, in the broader sense, right? Which is, and that's common in, in many cultures. Like, so if you say to someone, my son, or it's not, you don't really do that so much in English, but in many languages you do. You tell someone beta, right? It means, mere bete, my child. It means, it doesn't literally mean that now I've claimed that you're biologically mine, right? So those kinds of things, those are not criteria. And that's sometimes, because of lack of religious awareness, denying, ascribing lineage is one thing, giving someone a last name is another. Just like if a woman gets married, if she wants to adopt her husband's last name, there's nothing wrong with it. There's no religious requirements. Probably better not to change one's name, but there's no religious expectation to do so, nor any prohibition against doing it. It's a discretionary matter up to the person.
If we take on responsibility for a child in a non-permanent, reversible manner, what would the state would call fostership.
Yep.
Then, and that child is from a non-Muslim family.
Yeah.
What are the responsibilities there to raise them as Muslim or to
No.
raise them as non-Muslim, or what does Sharia have to say about that?
I mean, sometimes it's sort of a matter of common sense. Like, do I have to teach someone something that I don't believe in? No. No one would say that that's a reasonable expectation, right? But at the same time, let's say if someone is taking care of a child who's from, let's say they're from a Christian family, they need someone who is taking care of the child for a number. You can drop them off at where you can. There's arrangements made already, etc. You can allow them to go to, Sunday school or whatever, like for religious instruction or whatever, and their arrangements can be made, for that, right? And which is now, so that's, no one's bound. I don't have to teach someone something I don't believe, right? But if that's what, because it may, there's so many different human situations. Their parents may just, maybe just be struggling. There's, they may be incarcerated. There's all kinds of situations where it may not be a long-term matter. So you take care of the child, you take care of their well-being and their education, and they're part of the family, etc. Or they're doing what they're already doing, etc. And to allow that to drop them off for their religious instruction, whatever. It's not a case that if you have any kind of responsibility with respect to a child, you have to make them Muslim. That's not part of the religious equation with respect to raising a child. There's many historical examples of that from many different Muslim societies. In India, it's a common thing. If you see, for example, in the Mughal times in India, a lot of the ruling class was actually Hindu. And many times people within the ruling classes had very tight relationships. If you look, whether it be the Mughal court in Delhi or the various rulers over in Hyderabad, for example, Muslims say, often what happens, their close associate as part of, they're part of the military leadership or the bureaucratic leadership. A close friend of theirs died who's Hindu, so they raised their children. Right? In the sense that they took care of them, etc. What are they doing religiously? What they're already doing. Right? Now they may convert if they wish, but that's not part of the merit. The merit of adoption or guardianship is in taking care of that child, right? The religious and spiritual upbringing of the child is one part of all of the whole equation of raising the child. Now, you don't have to teach them something you don't believe in, and that's not reasonable according to any standard, right? Like, and it's also almost disrespectful, right? If you're not native, why should you go and teach them things that you let? If they already know, you let them do what they're doing. If not, you can allow them to go to to those who could instruct them in that. And so that's also a and any other last questions before? Okay, so just to summarize, there are a number of religious considerations. Which one needs to be aware of and to follow, but none of them are considerations that should prevent one from taking care of a child. And sometimes, if a limit comes, right? Like there's also a question of lesser harm, which is a consideration that is clearly, let's just say you are a single mother. There's no one else. There's no one else to take care of this 9-year-old boy. Let's just say, hypothetical situation. So is it better for that boy to be, let's just say, just hypothetical, it doesn't quite pan out in that way, because there are always, thankfully, there's many social protections. But just imagine you live in small town. The only person who is considering taking care of the child is you, and you are living, a Muslim woman living on your own. 9-year-old child. If you don't take care of them, they're homeless. Then, or let's say they're 10 and they're at an age where there's certain limits that are observed. There's a way of observing those limits, but the greater governing consideration is the basic interest of this child, right? And you do so while, there's certain things that, yes, the child now is close to puberty, so there's certain restrictions. So don't go to sleep on their bed. A lot of them are common sense things, right? Which guardian parent would go to sleep under the same bed sheet as their adopted child? Be a strange thing, right? And you observe that to the extent that you can. And when you can't, still the imperative of taking care of a child is given precedence over these criteria. You uphold them as best you can. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so we'll stop there. If there's further questions, we have a Q&A at the end. So you'll be thinking about that. There's a couple of points related to some of the religious dimensions that I'll bring up right at the end. But we'll stop here. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We're going to be breaking for our dhuhr right now and reconvening at 2:30 p.m. inshallah.
I thought you were boycotting.
أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So we're going to be reconvening with the second part right now, inshallah. If you can come back to your seats. The second part is actually pretty exciting because we have a representative from the Adoption Council of Ontario. As I can hear myself in the background. So that's what you guys are hearing. Okay. And another thing is that we have a couple here to share their adoption story. So it's pretty exciting. And Shaykh Faraz as well will be continuing. But before we introduce the next part of the seminar, I wanted to highlight some programming related to Seekers Hub Toronto. Now, I know some of you came here a bit later, so just a reminder that all of our programming and activities are provided free of cost, and they're delivered by qualified, trained scholars and teachers. So just a bunch of these programs that I wanted to bring to your attention. Tomorrow we have, or is it tonight? Well, technically it's 4 a.m., right? 4 a.m. tonight. We have a Qiyam al-Layl program that happens once a month. And it's basically, there's remembrance and Qiyam al-Layl, night vigils, that takes place before Fajr. They pray, and the scholars here, they pray Fajr together, and there's a mini potluck. You don't have to bring food if you don't have any. And yeah, so it's a nice way to start your Qiyam al-Layl practice if you haven't already. The next thing I wanted to highlight, we have a bunch of family-oriented programming. For example, we have a weekly gathering of remembrance that takes place on Fridays at 7:30 p.m. So it's a nice way to connect with Allah and the Prophet ﷺ on a weekly basis, and there's nice nasheeds that take place as well. Another family programming that takes place once a month is Stories of the Prophets. These are really exciting. There's a story of a prophet that is taught once a month, second Saturday of every month. The one coming up is on October 8th, I believe, and it's the story of Prophet Yusuf, so it's pretty exciting. So that's a bunch of the family-related program. There's also weekly classes if you're interested to take a class. Two of those that I wanted to highlight, the Wednesday class at 7:30 p.m. It's understanding the everyday Quran. So it's basically short surahs, explains that you say in your prayer. So it's good to understand what you're actually reciting in the prayer. And the second one is on Sundays at 12:30 p.m. A Mighty Legacy. The great women and men of the Islamic past. So Ustad Amjad Tarsin, who was the Muslim chaplaincy at UFT, he teaches that class, and it's very engaging. Okay, so now I would like to introduce to you Kimberly, or Kim for short, right? So Kimberly is a clinical social worker with the Adoption Council of Ontario. She works with the Permanency and Adoption Support Services program, which serves anyone touched by or connected to adoption and other forms of permanency with families. She's also the staff lead of the ACO's Youth Network Group, which serves young people with adoption and related experiences, providing them connections and support. Kimberly is a provincial trainer for adoption competency training for professionals and parents and has over 24 years of experience, mashallah, child welfare experience. She imparts both professional and personal adoption experience as an adopted person and as a formerly single adoptive parent. Now, there's actually much more to say about Kimberly here, and I told her I was very humbled when I read her bio, but I want to stop talking now, and I want to hand it over to Kim. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do I need the mic?
Yes, you could either use the handheld or there's a lapel mic if you
Okay. Which would work better? Either what?
whatever you would.
Thank you. Is this okay for everyone? Yes? And I'm going to need my glasses off and on, so. There, that's much better. Thank you, everyone. And as they say in my ancestral language, miigwech, which is like a bigger than thank you. So thank you for having me. This is the second time I've done this. I did this last fall, and it is really, I always love coming after the Sheikh because he makes my job so much easier. I don't have to convince anyone. I don't have to, you're here because you're interested. So I'm going to give you the nitty-gritty facts. And usually this is about an hour and a half seminar that I do. And I'm going to squish it into about half an hour and maybe less than that, depending on how fast they want me to talk. So really what you need to do is do like the full thing. So, but I'm going to give you the basics for today. And our next, we do this in seminars and webinars, some out here in Mississauga, some in Toronto, and webinars we do online. The next webinar I'm doing is October 6th online, and I have cards and things like that for people if they want them, okay? So first of all, you tell me if that's working for you there. I'm going to go through the many different pieces of adoption. So the first piece is what adoption is. Is that right? I can't see the screen to make sure it's correct. There's 2 on here. So adoption is really, it's the legal term we use for adoption, but really we use the term more and more of permanency, okay? That children, in our tagline at Adoption Council of Ontario, is children need families and families need support. Often children who come into adoption or some other type of permanent family, such as kinship, guardianship, foster care, they've suffered loss, and many of them have suffered a great deal of trauma. And so there are special needs that some kids have just because of the experience they've had before coming to their permanent family, okay? But the term adoption is a legal term, okay? So I'll use it interchangeably, but that adoption is a legal term, but it encompasses all kinds of permanent situations, okay? So who can adopt in Ontario? There's no age policy, so as long as you're an adult, you can do that. There are some kind of rules that some agencies that look at adoption look at, and that's kind of the 40-year span between you and your child that you're adopting. And that's because, as I said, some children, many children, they've encountered loss already. And so for somebody to have an older parent and then the possibility of losing yet one more parent can be challenging. So we want children to have as stable a family as possible. So while there's no parameters of you have to be 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever the age is, that's something that some agencies keep in mind depending on the child's age. Cultural considerations. So each agency tries to place children within their culture or within certain things that they need, in order to carry on. If you've had a child that's 10 years old and has had certain experiences in life, you want to try to honor those as best you can, okay? And again, there could be a long list of criteria that a child needs in a family, and every family is not going to be able to meet all of those needs, but each agency tries as best as they can to meet those needs of the child. And again, culture is only one aspect of the matching process. So if you have a child who has some specific need and a family is not of the same background, religion, race, culture, whatever, but they can meet that really important need, they would look at that need first, okay? And try to figure out how they could honor their culture and background and religion as well. In terms of marital status and sexual orientation, that does not impact your eligibility to adopt. So a child may require a 2-parent family because they have some significant needs. So a child who has significant medical or developmental need, they may need a parent who's more readily available and at home, and another parent who is making the money, basically, right? So or some combination of that. But that does not mean that if you're a single person with a great deal of support and family connections and other connections that you could not also adopt a child with special needs. It's a matter of how you present who your family is and how you're going to meet those children's needs. So what does it take to be an adopted parent? These are just some of the examples of what it takes. So loving, caring, dedicated, committed, understanding, patient, flexible, resourceful, compassionate, all those things that you hope any parent would be, but they're extra special when it comes to adoption. And yes, of course, some of those things waver at certain times, when children are hungry and tired and you're hungry and tired. But those are the things that we look for in adoptive families. There are 3 main types of adoptions in Ontario. So there's public adoption, so that's child welfare adoption. That means through a Children's Aid Society, and there's 44 of those in Ontario. There's private adoption, where a birth parent would make an adoption plan for their child. So they're not able to care and raise for their child, but they would like their child to be adopted by another family. And those often are ones where we see the most openness between the 2 families, between birth families and adoptive families. And then there's international adoption, so where a child is brought here from another country and adopted here in Canada. And that can be through a relative adoption, and it can also be through a child unrelated to that parent. And then there's additional options. So there's relative adoption here in Ontario, and there's kinship adoption. So we also look at, especially through Children's Aid Societies, are there any other family members that could raise this child in a permanent situation? So we often have families members who will come forth, or the agency will look for family members who will be able to provide a long-term permanent home for that child. There's also guardianship. So sometimes foster parents decide that they have a strong enough connection with this child that they will become the child's guardian, so that they don't have to be in the system anymore. They don't have to be a foster child anymore. They will take responsibility for that child until that child is an adult. And then we have customary care, which is used in the Aboriginal and Indigenous populations, where it's more of a community, where the whole community takes responsibility for that child. So what is required? I'm sure the family's going to talk to you a little bit about how lovely a process this is to go through it at different times. The requirements. There's a SAFE home study. So they call it SAFE, Structured Analysis Family Evaluation. This is where the worker that you have, whether it's through a Children's Aid Society or a private practitioner, gets to know you. And they really get to know you quite a bit. So some people find it very challenging. Some people find it intrusive. Because they really ask a lot of very personal questions. There's a lot of documentation. There's interviews. There's, reports that go along with that. And I like to, it's for a reason. I like to say, if I was to be giving my child to you to raise, I would not want any stone unturned. I would want to make sure that my child is going to be safe and healthy, and that we've looked at all the possibilities and that you are going to do the best job possible. So although it can feel overwhelming at times for some people, it's there for a reason. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, it's helpful to understand that. There's PRIDE training, which PRIDE training stands for Parent Resource Information Development and Education. I always get it wrong, so I'm sure I've got one of those wrong, but I'll come back to it later. And this is, there it is. I did get it right. Information Development and Education. So this is a required training for all potential prospective adoptive parents. And foster parents have to go through this training as well as kinship parents if they're involved within the Children's Aid Society. So if I'm going to be adopting my niece who happens to be in the care of the Children's Aid Society, I would also have to go through the same training that a foster parent and adoptive parent would need to go through. And then the last piece is portability. So if you have a home study done that approves you for adoption, you can use it within the public system. Also for private relinquishments and international. There are some qualifications around that, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But in essence, your home study is good for any type of adoption, depending on which route you go. And that's confusing, and that's probably a whole other half day that I could tell you about portability. But you'll have to learn this as you go. The SAFE home study. So this contains two parts. One is the written report that the social worker would do, and they would compile all the information, their assessments, and write a written report around who you are, who your family is, and what type of child would best suit your family. And then the other piece is the collateral documents. So, and that's all of the paperwork that goes along with that. And I'll have a list for you for later on that you'll be able to see. And this is something that all prospective adoptive parents must do. So they have to have a home study before they can move forward and be considered what's called adopt ready. They have to be approved, and all those things have to be done ahead of time. And they're based on information gathered by your adoption worker over the course of 4 to 6, usually 4 to 6 interviews. It could be more if needed, but generally it's 4 to 6 interviews. And the topics include your motivation for adopting, your education, your career plans, your lifestyle, your hobbies and interests, your family background and childhood, and your views on parenting and how you see yourself parenting children, and any previous experience with children or parenting. And probably more that I haven't touched on, but it's a lot of information, and that usually they're in your home. It focuses on your strengths and challenges unique to adoption and how they could be addressed in your family. And at the end, you would sign your final document. So the written report is, as I said, it's generally 4 to 6 interviews. It could be more. Say you've had something come up in your life, and and it's right at the time where you're doing your home study. Then you may need another piece of that. I've had people where their jobs have changed in the middle of home studies, where they've moved, where they've done all kinds of things, where they've had medical issues come up, and so sometimes those things take longer. Or maybe there's an issue that you hadn't known was going to be an issue until you started to look at adoption. Those are things that may take more time to go through. These are the collateral documents that you would be having to have completed. So things like references, police checks, sometimes those are international police checks. They also do child welfare checks. So a child welfare checks is a check within a child welfare agency, a children's aid society, to see if you've had a home study done before, if there's been any reports or concerns made before about you or anyone in your household. And that is for every place you've lived in Canada from the age of 18 onwards. So if you went to university in British Columbia and you took a job in Alberta and you lived for a year and did something in Nova Scotia, and then you came back to Toronto, that agency would do a child welfare check for every jurisdiction you have been in. So these things can take time, right? So, but those are requirements that have to be done. And in Toronto, there's 4 agencies. So not just would you have to do a child welfare check for Children's Aid of Toronto, but they would also do one for Native Child and Family Services, Jewish Child and Family Services, and Catholic Child and Family Services, and Toronto Children's Aid Society. So in some areas, there's more than one that you would do. So this is where you have a big binder of all the paperwork that you do, and you check it off as you go to make sure you've hit them all. They do medical reports, so you get a simple kind of clearance from your doctor, and make sure, many agencies want to make sure that you've had appropriate immunizations that you need, that you're healthy. That's not to say that you can't have health issues. Nobody is perfect. We're not looking for perfection. But we want to know that those are being addressed, that you're looking after yourself so that you can look after a child, that there's nothing going to be impeding your ability to look after a child. And then we look at references. So if you're a couple, we would look at 5 references. So 2 for one spouse and 2 for another spouse, and then 1 that you might know together. Generally, those are the ones. And those are people who've known you for a long time and know who you are and their specific questions. And those are confidential. So the agency would send them directly to those people, and they would send them directly to us. You get to pick who they are, but it's a check and balances to make sure that they get to answer them honestly for the report. We ask for pictures so that the agency who's presenting you for a child, can also present a picture of you as well. So home studies, there's no time frame to say that home studies shall be done in a certain period of time, but generally they can take up to 12 months to fully complete by the time you get all these collateral documents back from all the various places, and you have them all done, and the written report is all done. Generally it can take that long. And then the cost to you. So if you do it through a Children's Aid Society, there's no cost. The Children's Aid Society will do it on your behalf. If you do it through a private practitioner, the cost is generally a few $1,000s, okay? And depending on where you get it done can also be dependent on whether you get to hold on to your home study or whether the agency holds on to your home study for you. So often the Children's Aid Society will keep your home study. They kind of see it as they're doing it on your behalf. Some will give it out to you, and then a private practitioner, it is yours. You're paying for it, it is yours, and you can do what you want with it. And that would be the same for an international home study as well. home study update. So once you do your home study, you're done. So if you decide to adopt years later, you don't have to go through the whole thing all over again, but there may be things that need to be updated. So your job has changed, you got a bigger house, you know, some element of your family has changed over time, then those would need to be updated. And certain documents would need to be updated as well. So your child welfare checks wouldn't necessarily need to be fully updated. The one in your jurisdiction would need to be done, but not all the other ones you did where you lived when you were 20 years old. Your police checks are generally good for 2 years, and your medicals are usually good for about 2 years. So within that time frame, you would need to have those updated as well. Alrighty. So your adoption practitioner. So depending on the adoption, which avenue you pursue, you would have either a children's aid worker do your home study, or you would have a private practitioner do your home study who you would pay. And we have a list on our website of all the private practitioners that are available to you in many areas throughout the province. And so when you have it done through a Children's Aid Society, it gets approved right then and there through that agency. But when you have it done by a private practitioner, you get recommended for adoption. And then once a child is matched with you, then you basically get approved for that match. It's just a one extra little step that happens, but and usually it's not something that you would even notice. It's just sort of a legality that happens behind the scenes. And so then portability, I said, you know, this can be challenging. So it has a portable system. You know, there's one home study that gets done for adoption. And once you've completed your home study, which includes your PRIDE training, which I will talk about next, you are ready. You're considered adopt ready. But that doesn't mean that you can't keep learning. We always encourage people to keep going and learning as they go. And you can pursue a private adoption, a public adoption, a child welfare adoption, and one international country simultaneously. You could be looking at a child from all those circumstances at the same time. I don't think I've met anybody that's done that yet because it is a very challenging thing, but technically you could do that. Just like I haven't really met people who've pursued fertility issues, like tried to become pregnant and adoption at the same time. They're both very big processes and emotional processes. So often people are encouraged, you know, to have certain pieces finished before they go on to the next one. Usually I don't speak this fast, just so you know, I'm trying to get as much in as possible. So the adoption education. So this is the PRIDE training, and this is what all prospective adoptive families in Ontario have to complete. And some are completed, it's a 27-hour course. So some are completed 3 hours every week. So every Tuesday night, you go from 6:30 to 9:30, and you go for 9 weeks. Some are over the course of a weekend. So you go Saturday and Sunday this weekend, and you go Saturday and Sunday next weekend, and then you're done. It will depend on whether you take them through a Children's Aid Society or whether you take them privately as well. So, and they're designed to better prepare parents for the responsibilities, not just the parenting. They're not a parenting course. They're to help parents look at the unique issues that children in care or who have been adopted or suffer trauma and loss or come from another country may have experienced. So they would cover things like attachment, loss, trauma, child development and management. So there's normal child development, and then often children who have experienced those things have a delayed or a different type of development. So they're at a different stage often. And challenges specific to adoptive children's needs. So things like understanding where they come from, how to talk to them about adoption, how to connect them with adoption, how to help them with their feelings of loss from that experience. So, and again, it would depend on what you would like to, which avenue you'd like to go. So this only needs to be done once. So PRIDE is PRIDE. There's no update. It is just one course. And it can be done in advance of your home study, or it can be done at the same time. So if you wanted to go and learn about it, anybody can go and take a PRIDE course. You can go and do that if you want, but you can also do it while you're having your home study done. But it must be completed by the time your home study is finished. You won't be approved unless that is completed. And you have to go to every course. So you can't have, a husband go to the course and then the wife, learn about it later. They both, if there's two parents, they both have to go. That's a requirement. And then the cost to you ranges from free, if it's through a Children's Aid Society, to $700 or $800, or $14 if you're a single parent, to $1,400 to $1,600 for couples. So once you've done all that, then what happens? We've talked about the two different things, the home study piece and the education piece. So then what do you do now? So there's public, private, and international. So the public is the Children's Aid Society option. This is the most popular method of adoption, and it's becoming more popular, especially since some of the other avenues are declining, that the public adoption is becoming more popular. So each year, more than 800 public adoptions occur. And that seems like a lot, but then we also look at, we were talking about earlier that the statistics there's 6,000 children in Ontario in children's aid care. 800 versus 6,000. So that's a big number. And many of those children may still have connections with their family, but that doesn't mean that they don't need permanency as well. And that's something we call openness in adoption, and we can talk about that a little bit later. And children range in age from infants to teens. So yes, there are some babies that need to be adopted through the Children's Aid Society. But many of them are often older than that. So some Children's Aid Societies have requirements around who they're going to study. Thank you so much. In terms of they need to meet the needs of the children in their care, not the needs of you as a parent. Okay, so they do home studies and they prepare families for children. Children need families. They do it for the children. The child is their client, not you as a prospective adoptive parent coming to the Children's Aid Society who's wishing to be a parent, right? So it's a switch that often can be hard for people, especially when people really have a strong need or desire to build their family. That sometimes it can be very challenging. And again, there's 44 Children's Aid Societies and 4 Aboriginal Associate Agencies in Ontario. And those are generally north, but there's one in Toronto as well. And each CAS has either a geographical location, a cultural, or a faith-based boundary. So in Toronto, we have 4 different Children's Aid Societies. In Peel, there's just one. They cover everybody. In many jurisdictions, they cover everybody. And they need to meet the children's needs of all races, religions, cultures within that one agency. There we go. So if you're looking at a Children's Aid Society, they have a limited amount of resources. They're government funded, and they're looking after needs of children that are in need of protection. So children who are in foster care and group homes who may have treatment needs. However, those are the resources that their monies are going to, not necessarily adoption. So their resources for adoption can often be limited. And they can complete your home study only if you live in that area. So if you live in Peel, you'd call Peel Children's Aid. If you live in Durham, you call Durham Children's Aid. If you live in Thunder Bay, you call Thunder Bay Children's Aid, okay? Occasionally, there will be some overlap. So if there's a child in Toronto who's in, I know there's a parent that is available in another area, I might do their home study for them. And so I did that with a family that's going to talk to you. Really, they lived in another area, but the child was in Toronto. So I went and I did their home study for them. So, or their second update home study for them. So there are some leeways around that, but generally it's done where you live. But once you have your home study done, you can adopt a child from anywhere in Ontario. So part of the Adoption Council of Ontario has another program within it called Adopt Ontario, and that is a service where we match children and families together. So children in need of families and families who are ready to adopt. So workers from various agencies would say, I have these 3 children and they all need a family. Is there a family within the province who would adopt these children? And that's a matching, there's a data bank service that goes along with it. And that's a service that is available to people who are adopt ready as well. And there's other means. Many of the, twice a year, there's what we call adoption resource exchange that happens in Toronto, and there's smaller ones in other jurisdictions where families who are adopt ready can come and look at profiles of children and videos of children who they may be good parents for. And that's a different way. So, and just because you don't live in that area doesn't mean you can't adopt the child from that area. So how do Children's Aid Societies work? So each Children's Aid will decide how to bring families into their system. So as I said, they often have limited resources. So if they don't have, right now, any children under the age of 2, and you come and you say, well, I would like to adopt a child, but I would like a child who's 0 to 18 months. They might say to you, sorry, we're not going to do that because we need families who are going to take children 3 and up or 6 and up or whatever it is. Or we need families who will take 2 or 3 children. Or we need families of certain cultural or religious backgrounds. Or we need children who are families who will accept child who's been exposed to alcohol prenatally or drugs prenatally, or would accept a family who has mental health in the background. And so we need people to be open to that. So often you would call a Children's Aid Society and say, I'd like to adopt a child, and they would ask you a list of questions similar to that, what I've just mentioned. And if you say no, they could say, sorry, maybe you should go to the private agency. But what I often tell people is you need to do your research first in terms of what does it mean to adopt a child who may have some significant challenges. And as I like to say, nobody knows what your child would bring before they're born. You don't know what they're going to need until they're actually here in this world. So even children who are adopted, we don't often know what they're going to bring, but we do know that many children who have been exposed prenatally to certain things may have some challenges later on. And we often don't know specifically what they are until they're older, until they hit school, and we know, oh, they have a learning disability. But that may also happen to your birth child. It could be anything, right? So those are things you need to understand and appreciate ahead of time and keep learning about over the years to come. Some Children's Aid Societies will have a waiting list, and some will have criteria, as I said. So your first step is to call your Children's Aid Society and begin that process to ask them. Many of them have an information night where you can come and learn about the different children that they may have and what makes sense for you and for those children. And then you must complete all your paperwork in your local jurisdiction, but you can, adopt from anywhere. So you can't go and have your, I often say, just go to Newmarket and get your police check done there because it only takes a couple of days to do it there. But if you don't live in York, you can't do that. You have to do it where you live. So it can be challenging in terms of where you live and what community you live in. But again, we encourage you to talk to your local Children's Aid to find out more about the process. And on our website, you can also find a list of all the Children's Aid Societies as well as a Getting Started page. So what are the pros of public adoption? That you get the availability of health and family information, you get lots of kids who are available, you get the Children's Aid support through the information process, the decision-making process, and sometimes subsidies are available post-placement for children who may need it. Anyway, I'm going to skip through because there's the private, and this just to give you the numbers. Very similar process, but there's average 90 to 120 private adoptions in Ontario each year. And these are often infants, but not always infants. And this is when birth families make a decision voluntarily to place a child for adoption. And the pros of that is there often availability of newborns, and usually directly from hospital. And there's also availability of health and family information as known by the birth family that you would be connected with. And an opportunity for the child to have a relationship with his or her birth family. So this is when you would look at how will this child know this birth parent or birth parents throughout the years. For this type of adoption, generally you need to be financially prepared because there is costs involved in this. Patient, there's no time frame for a family to select you. You know, it happens when it happens. Comfortable marketing yourself, so you often have to let people know you're looking to adopt, and there's different means to do that. And comfortable with openness in terms of developing an ongoing relationship with your child's birth family. And then the last piece, is international adoption. So approximately 450 Ontario families apply to adopt internationally each year. And this is a number that's decreasing, international adoption, as more restrictions come from different countries around adoption. The number does decrease, and the length of time it happens it takes can often increase. And generally, kids are 1 year or older, and many of them, if not most of them, live in orphanages. Some countries are looking into foster care more rather than orphanages, which is a positive thing. And Ontario has a number of programs with various countries, and you're looking at a good chunk of money, 30 to 50, right? That includes your travel, that includes all the documents, that includes a lot of things. So it's something to be mindful of as well. And then just briefly, there's a relative adoption, and that can be a relative adoption can be completed here in Ontario through a family court. And only Adoptions Ontario, where you don't require home study or pride training, can that happen. So that would be like a step-parent adoption, something like that, where you would not necessarily need to have a home study or go to pride training. And just a word about openness. I think this is. We like to say there's no closed adoptions anymore. In this social media age, there really are no closed adoptions. So it's really important that families understand that, and that it's a normal process for anyone to understand where they come from. And the less you have to search and the more that is provided for you, the healthier your identity will be. Possible next steps for you. One, attend a full-fledged webinar to get all of the nitty-gritty, not just the thumbnail sketch of all of this. And to look at, which is best for you to explore. So you could sign up for a pride training. You could do that if you care to spend that kind of money. Call your local Children's Aid Society. All kinds of things. And there's, I'll just give you our website information there. I have cards here, and I will give cards for our Adopt Ontario clinicians as well. So generally I support families who are already adopted, but we also have several staff who look at families who are just entering adoption and helping them with this process because it can be overwhelming and it's a lot to take in. This is just a quick kind of sketch of what it's all about, and there's a lot more to learn. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. I took a lot of notes, actually. So now I'd like to introduce Riyad and Nazima Khan to the stage. They are adoptive parents of 2 boys and 1 girl. Nazima has been a registered nurse for the past 13 years, and Riyad has been a high school teacher for the past 10 years. They provide counsel and support and advice to anyone interested in learning more about adoption. So you can either email them at islamicadoption@gmail.com, or you can follow them on Twitter for links to adoption resources, inshallah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank you so much to Seekers Hub for inviting us to share our story. We always love attending such gatherings because it allows us to reflect on our own experiences and share the joy that we have currently with our adopted children. And any help and support and advice that we can give to people, we're more than willing to share. So again, thank you for having us, inshallah. There's a lot to talk about, and we'll try to be as concise as possible. But I mean, we are available afterwards if anyone has any specific questions, and if we didn't cover anything, you can always ask us, inshallah. So I guess we'll try to share our story, and more importantly, I think share some of our, the emotions and the things that we went through, because it is a very emotional journey to go through adoption, and what led us to adoption is our own infertility. So dealing with your own infertility issues, coming to terms with that, and then deciding to seek to extend your family through adoption. These are all very emotional things. There's a lot of heavy topics that you have to address with yourselves, with your partner, with your families. So it's important that you understand where you are and really come to terms with things that you're going through. So you want to talk about the infertility part?
Sure. When we got married, we had that discussion that we wanted to start our family early. We were young. We were 21 at that time, but we were like, gung ho of starting a family early. Allah had better plans for us. We realized things later, but obviously at that time it's a struggle. We chose to be very private about it. I think overall we keep to ourselves in terms of what we thought was such sensitive information. Probably, obviously things change as you age and as you go through certain circumstances. Definitely now, I would say that was probably the worst thing we did. I think right now, especially compared to when we first started, which was maybe 9 years ago or so, we felt very isolated in terms of support. We were very grateful that our immediate families, were very supportive of the idea, and even through our infertility. However, we didn't share that with our other extended family and friends. Now we're very grateful that even after going through the adoption, you always need support. You remember everything you went through. You want to be there to support people. But adoption, obviously, it's still in a sense new to us. We're going to continue to go through stages where we're in an unfamiliar place, and it's great to have that support. Last year, Amal Fertility contacted us, and I was amazed when I attended that conference. It's sad to see so many people going through infertility issues, but it was also really exciting to see the support group that was being established. The more support you have, and I talk about that for infertility, but also for going through the adoption process, the more support you have, the better it is for you. When we adopted, it was great that we had that family support, but when we were going through our infertility issues, we were very quiet, and a lot of people, you evade those questions. Everyone's like, so, when are you going to have a family? We're like, we'll see how things go. And, we never shared publicly what we were going through. I think it's important to start seeking support and resources. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of resources out there. And it's something so difficult to go through by yourself. So obviously, the more support you have, the better. In all honesty, we tried a fertility treatment and things did not go well. I ended up in the hospital, and literally I had said, "Oh, I don't want anyone knowing in our family. I just don't want the pressure." And we literally had to call our parents, and he called my parents, and he's like, "She's in the hospital," and they're like, "From what?" They had absolutely no idea. And I realized that infertility is a loss for a lot of people. Obviously as the couple, you're grieving the fact that you have no control over this. I think it's something that's so hard that you think you have control and you want to have control over this, that when you're going to start a family, how many kids you're going to have, etc. But this is something that's completely out of your control. And so it's nice when you have that support. So I was losing my train of thought, sorry. But it's nice when you have that support because you need it at every stage. It's depending on how you're going, whether it was me or him, we're both in need of that support. So that was our... Yeah. It's hard. We're trying to condense it, so bear with us.
Yeah, so, what I would advise, firstly, is that you have to be ready, emotionally, mentally, and have that support system. You need to make that decision. The couple or the person looking to adopt needs to make that decision that this is, an avenue or a path that I want to go down, because I believe it's the right thing to do. Ultimately, our intention at least was we wanted to have a family. We wanted to be able to provide a loving home for a child, and
have that child bring joy to us and our family. And that was ultimately why we decided to pursue adoption. Infertility kind of led us there, but ultimately we had to take that step. We had to come to that realization that ultimately we want to provide a loving family for a child. And once we made that decision, and she made it faster than I did, because I think adoption wasn't something that was prevalent in my upbringing. I did not know any family that had adopted. I always imagined that naturally you get married, you have your own birth child, and you progress through life. So this was something new to me. I had to do my own research. I had to come to my own realizations. And once we made that decision, together we were ready. We were ready to start the journey. We were ready to help to educate our families, to help get the support that we needed. But ultimately, that was a very personal thing that we had to come to. So that's how we started our journey. So once we got there, our next step, Kim outlined the next steps really clearly, but for us personally, once what we decided to do was do our own research, right? Find out what it takes to get adopted, to adopt a child. So we learned about the home study, we learned about the pride training, we explored different avenues, the international adoption, public adoption, etc. So we had a lot of research to do. We spoke to adoption practitioners. We looked online and tried to gather as much research and as much information as possible. And for a variety of different reasons, which I won't really go into now because I don't want to take up too much time on that, we decided to actually pursue international adoption. Given all of the expenses involved and all the difficulties that would come along with it, we thought this would be the best way for us to begin our journey and start our family. So the path that we took, we actually got a private adoption practitioner to conduct the home study as well as the pride training. And after that, before that, the home study itself is, as Kim mentioned, can be quite intrusive. There's a lot of personal questions that are asked. They find out, they want to know obviously that you're ready to adopt, right? They want to know that you're stable, you're coming from a good place, you've arrived at the decision to adopt on your own, and you're ready to make that step. So we understand why, but when you're going through it, it can be quite difficult, right? Quite personal, because they're asking really, really personal information from you. In addition to the police check and all that stuff, but the questions that they ask, can be quite personal. And then once all of that had been completed, our adoption practitioner, was ready to send off the home study to actually be approved. And do you want to talk about the approval process?
So initially, when our file got sent off, we got a letter back saying that we weren't approved, and the reason for this was I had, while during our fertility treatments, I had become quite sick, ended up in the hospital, had an emergency hysterectomy, and so they were concerned that we were making an emotional decision, that because of the hysterectomy I couldn't have kids, so okay, we made it an emotional decision. They wanted to confirm that we hadn't made this like it wasn't a rash decision. Luckily for us, we had received counseling through our local imam, and we just had to provide that documentation to them that no, this was not in fact a rush decision. We had done our research, we had looked into all our possibilities, and alhamdulillah, soon after that we got approved. When we did start off, it was very confusing for us. So we actually initially started off looking into a program in Pakistan. We're not from Pakistan, but again, we were trying to find out what was the best way. And then from there, we attended the Pride conference, and we started speaking to a lot of people who were in the process, and then which led us to Ethiopia and then South Africa. And at the end, we ended up settling with the South African program. We started our process, and someone mentioned to us someone mentioned a family friend of ours. At this point, we had told everyone that we were looking to adopt. It was great because now this was, it was building the excitement for us. It was building awareness in the community, and we had a lot of support. So again, we were using this moment to educate people around us and our family and our friends and our community that this is in fact what our plan is. We're inshallah planning to adopt. So it was great to get that support. Someone mentioned to us that why don't you submit your file to CAS, Children's Aid Society? And we're like, oh, again, we heard these things that, oh, I heard it's a really long waiting, there's a waiting list and it can take years. We wanted, the fastest route, which is why we went internationally at that time, what we thought. Each country has their own restrictions, money, but it's also, you're looking at, in terms of private adoptions, sometimes you're getting very little information, and Kim touched upon a lot of that information as well, that a lot of these children are in orphanages. When we sent our file into Children's Aid Society, we were very lucky that, alhamdulillah, we heard that they were looking for a Muslim family, and we did get a call shortly after, and we were able to adopt our first child. It's interesting because, I think what a lot of people have, those questions are that, how am I going to know, how am I going to love a child that I don't know? How am I going to have this instant bond with this child? And it's okay to feel that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. These are natural feelings or fears that someone might have. We saw a picture of him and he was cute, but I'm like, wow, he looks big. And we knew that he was only 11 months, or actually just 10 months at that time. He was almost 11 months. And I'm thinking like, oh, wow, we were thinking of a little small one, and here's he was standing on a sofa, and I'm like, oh my God, he's big. How am I going to do this? And that's normal. And then I remember we went to do our first visit in his foster family, and it's absolutely amazing because the foster family came and put him down, and we're like, okay, you just want to grab him and hold him and kiss him and play with him, but you're like, you don't want to freak him out. So we had to be really gradual, and slowly I sat beside him and I was giving him a toy, and then I picked him up and just gently put him in my lap, and he just looked up at me and he put his hand on my cheek, and it was literally, I'm like, this is meant to be. This is the reason everything played out the way it was supposed to. My hysterectomy, the infertility, the hysterectomy, these children were what the whole story was. This was all meant to happen. If you want to.
So we never imagined that that's where our journey would take us, right? We, as Nazma mentioned, that we intended to go international. And we were actually skeptical when we got some advice, send our home study into CAS. We were skeptical because, we intended to adopt from South Africa. Our file's sitting there. We were told that we're just in the waiting process. As soon as a child is available that matches our profile, then, we'll start the journey and travel to South Africa, bring the child back home. So we were really hesitant. We were like, why disrupt all of that, and send in our home study to the CAS? So we were confused. We sought advice from our families, made istikhara, and ultimately decided to send our file in. And it worked out in our favor that this is the means that we took to get our first child into our home. And just to touch upon the feelings that you get, this is my personal opinion, that if you really had that intention of providing a loving home for the child, then you will find that connection with the child, right? That child it's natural, right? It's natural. You see, this little one that needs love, they need attention, they need, they need you, right? And to be able to provide that, ultimately it makes everything worth it, right? It doesn't. The struggles that you go through and the hardships and the ups and downs, the emotional baggage that comes along with it, when you pick up that child for the first time and welcome them into your home, that it makes everything worth it.
It was interesting that the foster family had 2 little kids at that time. And I was like, can we just take them both home? Because literally you see this child and you're like, all you can think about is, I feel bad that I'm taking one home to provide a home for this one child. And yet, even when we did a visitation with the foster home family afterwards, just to show them how he was doing, we asked, how is she? What happened to her? Because your heart is getting attached to these children that you see. And we ended up, alhamdulillah, adopting 3 kids in total. And they were in different foster families. And every foster family we went, they always had multiple children. And it was so hard to just bring one home. And your mind and your heart is thinking about all these other kids that are still waiting for their forever families.
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, as Nazma mentioned, after we adopted our first child, Kim was actually our social worker, and Kim's our hero, by the way.
Yeah.
So, she was great, helping us through the process, and we had multiple visitations with our son, and eventually brought him home. And then about maybe a year and a half later or so, Kim gave us a call and said, "Are you planning to take any vacations over the summer? Because you shouldn't." And we were told that his brother was actually being placed for adoption. So we waited, for everything to work out. Same process, updated the home study. We went and did the visitations, and we're lucky enough to get his brother into our home as well. And then just like 3 months after that, we got a call from Kim again. I told Kim every time she calls, my life changes. So we were told that the birth mother was actually giving birth in the hospital, and she was going to be placing that child for adoption as well. It turned out to be a girl, so we ended up with two boys and the 1 girl, and they're all siblings. So. Alhamdulillah, this is obviously we believe this is the plan of Allah, and this was our reward for all the hardship and all the difficulties, and this was the ease, right, that we were waiting for. So it's not a fairy tale story. It seems unrealistic, but this was our story. This is what we went through, and ultimately, my advice again: you have to come up with that firm belief that you are there to provide a home for this child. This is something, as Shaykh Faraz mentioned, that's something that's very praiseworthy in our tradition, and something that is needed in our community. So. We are strong advocates for adoption and foster care. We believe that these children need homes, they need families to care for them, and there's no reason why that should be happening. So we, as a community, should definitely step up to fulfill that need, inshallah.
Just to add one last thing, because I know we're up for time. We've tried to be very open with the kids, because I think that's a question that a lot of people have. So from the beginning, we use the term adoption very openly with them. We did not want this to be a taboo subject. We did not want them to hear the words and be confused about what that meant. Obviously, they're young. Right now, they're 7, 6, and 4. So we have to obviously gauge how much understanding they have. And, year by year, we add a little bit more information. And it's interesting. My youngest one seems to understand quite a bit. And one day, she's like, "Mama, I want another baby." I'm like, "Well, we can't just go to the store and get another baby." She's like, "No, you can go to the foster family and get another baby." She knew she came from this foster family. We have an open relationship with them. They love to see how these children are doing, and so she knows that there's kids there that need homes. So we could just do that. And even just a few nights ago, I was putting her to sleep, and she's like, I gave her a toy. I said, "I gave this to you when you were a baby," and she's like, "After I came from my foster family," and I said, "Yeah," and she's like, "Who was your foster family, Mama, when you were small?" And I had to start talking to her that I didn't come from a foster family, and it's interesting because a lot of people think I want the child to look like me so I don't have to talk about this stuff. It's so important to start talking to your kids from such a young age. Like I said, she's 4, but we started talking to them from when they were very small and trying to be very open with them. Obviously, as they get older, there's going to be challenges. We're not ducking our head in the sand. There's definitely going to be challenges as they get older. There's going to be a lot of questions that they have, and we just have to be able to remind ourselves, like Kim said, that this is a difficult process for them. They did lose something. There's going to be a lot of questions that they have about where they came from, and we have to just remind ourselves that we just have to be there to support them. the journey for them and us isn't going to end. There's always going to be something new added to this. And it's just important to realize that, again, like Riyadh said, a lot of people say, oh, you guys have the perfect story. No, it came with a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, and it's not done yet. There's definitely, I think a lot of people think, okay, I adopted, we're done, happily ever after. There's a lot of challenges that are going to come. It's not to stop someone from adopting. I think it was the best thing we could have done. However, you need to be open-minded about, there will be challenges in the future, and you can get through them. Just like any other life challenges, you can get through them, and it shouldn't stop someone from wanting to pursue adoption. And I'm sorry for going over.
Jazakallah khairan. That was, all I have to say is wow, mashallah. Jazakallah khairan. Okay, so now we are going to be going for a 10-minute break, but before we do, I just wanted to ask Sister Fatima and Sister Sarah to give a one-liner of what Amal fertility is, just a one-liner, because there's a booth by the registration table, the entrance, beside the entrance, if you're interested for more information about Amal fertility. And then afterwards, we're going to be having a 10-minute break and then coming back for the Q&A session, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, sister. Every time I hear, this is the third time I've heard Nazima and Riyadh speaking, and every time I hear them, I have tears in my eyes. It's, mashallah, they inspire me every single time. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Fatima Shaykh, and we co-founded Amal Fertility Support Group with Sarah Hussein, and we've been around for about a year. And so, Amal Fertility Support Group, we came to the idea because there was no resources, like Nazima said, for a support group, and so we decided that this was a great opportunity for us to start one. Amal Fertility Support Group envisions a supportive and collaborative learning environment that empowers women and helps them create a happy family life. As an infertility support group, we advocate and promote adoption and foster care. Many in the community, including religious leaders, are not aware of how isolating infertility can be for Muslim women and couples. And it continues to remain so. And they continue to remain out of touch as to how much of an impact this has on the people within their community. It could be their neighbors or coworkers or family members, and it's not spoken of openly. And many times, women and couples don't have an outlet. They don't have anyone to talk to. They don't feel comfortable talking to their friends or families. We've had one such case where a couple has been going through infertility journey by themselves for the longest time. Their parents didn't know about it. Their family didn't know about it for years. And after coming to the support group, they felt comfortable enough to actually go and speak to their family and friends, and found that their family friends were very supportive of their journey, and we might have some happy news, inshallah. So our aim is to have Muslim leaders and Islamic organizations tackle subjects like infertility, tackle subjects like childlessness in our communities, and hopefully remove the stigma that comes along with it and the misconceptions that are around it, that are rampant around it. Sometimes I say to family and friends that many a times what happens is that instead of talking about infertility or looking for a solution, there are many people who would rather look into marrying another person, another woman, just so they can have children. And it is unfair to use that as an excuse, as a reason to go and include somebody else in your family. It doesn't address the issue. We hope to start infertility support groups across Canada so Muslim women can connect with each other in a safe and nurturing environment, so that they can get a sense of camaraderie and find out that they're not the only ones in this situation, so that a couple of women in our support group found out that they have the same issue, and we're able to support each other in their journey and help each other in terms of finding resources. And connected that way, and they feel empowered. It's very empowering to find out that you're not the only one in that situation, that there are other people in that situation, and that you can help them and they can help you, and find resources. And when I myself had also gone through infertility for many years, me and my husband, and we didn't have any of the resources. We didn't know what was available to us, what services, what people, what occupations were available to us. I didn't know what a pelvic therapist was. So these are some of the things that we talk about in our infertility support group. We also hope to continue providing educational as well as social events for women and couples, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for listening to me. Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan. So, someone just told me that you guys might be hungry right now. So in order to provide the refreshments more quickly than I had hoped, than I had announced, let's minimize the break to just a stretch right now. And while we're doing that, and then right after, we're going to be jumping into the Q&A session, because I know a lot of you had some questions for Shaykh Faraz. And then afterwards, we're going to have the refreshments, okay? So while everyone's just stretching, I wanted to thank our guests today. I personally learned a lot from all of you. So if I can have Noreen just come and just provide some flowers we wanted to give to some of our guests. To Kimberly and Amal Fertility and Nazma. We really, really appreciate you coming today. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan. So all of you can just get up and stretch, and Shaykh Faraz will be here shortly for the Q&A session, inshallah. So for the Q&A session, we'd actually like everyone to be on stage for this. So Shaykh Faraz, Brother Riyad, Sister Nazma, and Kimberly, inshallah. So does anyone have any questions for anyone on stage right now? Yes.
So there's a question online. Is there any way to make an adopted child a mahram or for both parents?
So the adopted child, um, can they become a mahram for both parents? The brief answer, with the mother, they can become, if they nurse before the age of 2, then the child becomes a mahram for them. So some of the restrictions, with respect to interaction, etc., no longer apply, because then she's considered their mother through nursing, right? But that that affects the mother, but not the father. So if the adopted child hits puberty, then the guidelines of interaction would apply in terms of hijab, for example, in terms of physical contact and so on. But those are but in but you know it's, but that's not an exclusionary condition to adoption, in the sense that if one considers the great merit of adoption, then it's not a difficult thing. It's not uncommon for people to cover at home, etc., where they're around other people and they have the privacy of their room. But so things like that, they're not exclusion. It is by no means exclusionary to adoption. Right? And the other thing that sometimes people make things very difficult for themselves is one should just consult, because some things seem very difficult, but if one consults, it's not such a big deal. Right? Try it. Right? It's like, and when people tell you, well, it's not, why? Because other people have dealt with it. If there's a couple, for example, they've dealt with it, etc. So on. In general, this is something that things that sometimes we don't take a step that we would want to take or we should take, either out of personal choice or out of the religious virtue in it, because of there being many question marks. Right? And the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said something very profound. He said, the only cure for confusion is to ask. Right? So if you consult that, okay, well, this seems difficult, how do I deal with it? And there's people who've dealt with many such cases, or people who have specific experience, and they'll tell you it's not that complicated. These are some guidelines, or do your best. And but it shouldn't preclude one. So it can give one the confidence to take that step. Allah knows best.
Assalamu alaikum. So yes, that is correct. I actually did that myself for all 3 of the children. There is a protocol. Obviously, you would have to talk to your healthcare practitioner, make sure that things are safe and okay. There's a prescription medication. There's a whole protocol that you would do, and it depends on your health and it depends on your situation and circumstances and how long it could take. But definitely there is that possibility. If you want to look into more information about that, the information that I had found was on Jack Newman's website, and it was very, very thorough. So that's what I had done. I had found out about this, and then I went to my family doctor, spoke to her about if it was okay for me to do this, and she was very supportive of it. But that's where I found all that information, and that's the one I had followed.
In terms of merit, is it the same to sponsor a child as it is to adopt? So there's a lot of options for sponsorship where one just gives money.
So there's the same reward? I mean, there's various things. The virtue of an action has various components. So supporting, sponsoring an orphan, for example, has tremendous merit. Educating an orphan or someone who otherwise may not have access to education. There's great merit, but there's greater merit in something that you do directly yourself, and that's in general. Any virtuous act that is done directly has greater benefit. One is more expressive of concern. It also requires greater effort, right? And it affects you in a different manner, because ultimately, all the things that we do, it's not just about the act of doing things, but also it changes how you are. It changes how you are. Right? Just as with charity, while one can just send, you can feed the poor somewhere out there, but but the Prophet, peace and blessings be on him, was himself commanded to remain with the poor, and the merit of eating with the poor, and that the most blessed weddings are those in which not only the rich are invited to, but the poor are invited to as well, right? And even with servants, and in those times slaves, right? If someone has servants, the sunnah is that you don't just feed your servants, but that you have them eat with you, right? It's not just, okay, the servant eats in the kitchen and the people of the household sit, but any act of good is done, that's done directly, is of greater merit. And here, above and beyond the financial aspect, the time invested, the concern invested, what it requires of patience and care and all these things, right? All of that, these are discrete acts. One is rewarded for those, plus it changes, profoundly is supposed to change the guardian themselves. So there's no comparison between the two, right? In terms of their merit. But if one cannot, or it's difficult, or circumstances don't facilitate, one may have other responsibilities, then there is also tremendous reward in sponsoring an orphan, etc. But also these things, especially as we settle as a community here, that the idea of charity begins at home, right? And this is home, and the first circle of responsibility are our own neighborhoods and our own communities, right, around us. And there is also broader human concern for anyone in need anywhere, right? But this is an important, sometimes neglected aspect of giving as well, that we have to be careful about. For example, when it comes to zakat, the obligatory charity, according to the vast majority of Islamic scholarship, it is disliked to send zakat overseas if there are poor and needy people in one's own area. And then there's details, unless the people elsewhere are more needy. But the fact that there are people who may be more needy somewhere else does not absolve you of the immediacy of responsibility to those in one's area. And the same thing applies with respect to orphans, for example.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Can I add to that?
Mm-hmm.
The best thing, it's on, they turned it off. The thing I always talk to people who want to support adoptive parents is the best thing to do is to ask them what they need. So it may not be that they need babysitting or they need money or childcare or whatever, but I can tell you as an adoptive parent, the most fabulous things that ever happened to me was when I would come home from work after picking up my child at daycare, and my mom had come over and emptied my dishwasher and put my recycling out for me. And it was like, oh, thank you, Mom, or thank you, whoever. I had lots of little helpers that helped me along the way, and they knew me enough to know that's the best thing that you could have done for me, right? I didn't need them to parent my child. I didn't need them to, but some people would do that. There's lots of big families out there that need, they have soccer games and art class and tutoring and whatever. And so how can you help that family? How can you help them with providing all those things, not just financially, maybe financially is one way, but maybe offer to do a Saturday, and take them to soccer practice or whatever it is, so that the parents can also rejuvenate to meet all of their needs as well. So the best thing to do is ask, what can I do to help? And it may not be money at all, maybe time.
Yeah, this is going back to what Shaykh Faraz had talked about, but it's a question for you, Kimberly. What are the category of children who are the most needy, who are not getting support in the system right now?
I would say the children who are in most of need are the children who have the most needs. So the children who have been exposed prenatally to alcohol and drugs, the children who are medically fragile, those are the children who have delays. The children where there are multiple children in one family, that we want to keep siblings together. So a family who would not just take one child, but would take 2 children, 3 children. I've had a family start with 3 and end with 4. I had this family take 1 and end with 3. At some point, yes, your house is only so big. You have to say no sometimes too. But families who are willing to do whatever they can, and you'll find that if you do that, then there will be support along the way. And sometimes you do have to ask for support. But there are kids out there that are waiting. So kids who are going to need support for the rest of their lives, that will have delays. Those are the people that need protection. Those are kids who need protection and support and care the most.
Now, what I noticed when you were doing your presentation, amongst the Aboriginal groups or the Native, they do customary care. And that's a group of people taking in, how does that work?
So generally, they would happen where a child has status. So they would have Aboriginal status, what would be a community. Yes, there would be one sort of person to take the lead on that, but the whole community would take a responsibility for that child as well. So there would be portions of that community that would make sure that their schooling was looked after, that their various needs are looked after. And that's done in conjunction with the elders in that community and the community as well. And often there's family members there, right? There's extended family members who also take on that role. But it's a promise, It's basically a promise that they agree that they're going to raise this child together and take full responsibility.
That model is only done amongst the Aboriginals, not something that could be done, extended to other...
I see where you're going, because it is very similar, right? It's something that could be applied to other cultures, I'm sure. Yeah.
I can just add one thing. I wanted to say that with our children, obviously, things come up that you didn't know about before, and one of the issues was speech delays. And I have to say, Children's Aid Society has been absolutely fantastic with support. Post-adoption support has been unbelievable for us. Any type of support we needed, or questions we had, or resources we've needed, they have definitely been there. So I did want to add that with different things that we've needed in terms of resources and support, our adoptions are all finalized, and yet we still have this ongoing support from them.
What's the average time to say adopt?
Families hate this answer because it's airy-fairy, right? It happens when it happens, right? So it's not about, there's no next in line. So it's not like, well, you get the next 4-year-old that comes, or you get the next infant, or it's about what you and your family offer and can bring to the life of a child and making the best match possible. So we have families who, for this family, once they came to us, it happened pretty quick, right? Within a matter of weeks, I think. If not sooner, right? And then there's other families where it would be longer. Now we know we have, within Children's Aid Societies, there's often a group of families who are looking at the same types of children as well. So sometimes you might have, in this larger, area, urban area, you have many families, but in other smaller communities, there may not be any families available for a child, and so then they look in other communities. So some children wait a very long time because they have multiple needs, and some children don't wait that long at all once they're free for adoption. The court process to be free for adoption can be quite lengthy sometimes as well, despite checks and balances to try to combat that. So I didn't answer your question. I know I didn't answer your question. There is no time. Yeah.
Just a question around post-adoption. What are the requirements that you as parents have to keep, I guess, back with the agency or whatnot?
Right. So there is a probationary period 6 months afterwards. So once you've had the child in your home, there is monthly visits that take place. So your adoption worker, your adoption worker would come in and just check up with you and the child and see that, make sure everything's going okay. Any help that you need, any assistance, any questions that you might have, and just to see, the overall well-being of the child, to make sure the child is happy and being taken care of as should be. So that's a probationary period, and then once that is done, then you can then the court proceedings will be held, and then the adoption would be finalized. Now, once adoption is finalized, there's no more visitations per se from Children's Aid, for example, but they are there to provide support. So it could be, as Nazma mentioned, just resources or answers that that you may need, and it could even be like financial assistance as well, depending on the situation.
And just to add that, each agency is very different. So some would have a larger budget to look after those needs, and some have no budget to look after. So there's some families who don't have any post-adoption support, and that's why we do what we can to help advocate through the Adoption Council of Ontario to help advocate for those families. As well as if you adopt internationally, that child is adopted, and there is no financial assistance for no matter what need comes up. So, and privately, it's the same thing. So yes, in some areas there is financial post-adoption support and other resources, but in also many communities there is not as well. So all the more reason to ask families what they need and how you can help them.
Sorry, I wasn't here earlier, but are you a practitioner?
I was through a Children's Aid Society. I worked there for 24 years, and now I work in another agency that provides support for families.
So you're available?
We are available. We serve anyone touched by adoption. So we have adoptees call us, we have birth families call us, and we have adoptive families call us, all looking for different kinds of assistance or support or resources. And that includes also kinship families and other families who have similar situations but just don't have that legal adoption title. So we look at all different types of families.
I have two questions. So my first question is there regular reasons for adoption to go wrong after post-adoption? Is there like challenges which comes regularly, and how can they be avoided? And my second question is it Islamically problematic to separate siblings?
So I'll take the first question, that is it Islamically problematic for siblings to be separated? It's, of course, this is assuming that they're up for adoption, right? You don't just separate them like without reason, but yeah, it's highly, there's a whole number of teachings of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that as much as possible, siblings should be kept together, right? And separating them without need, is blameworthy. So if someone is able to adopt both siblings and they say, no, I'm just going to take the son, or I'll just take the girl, it's not the ideal situation for obvious reasons, because but in the event if there's no other, it is permissible in situations of necessity, of course, or difficulty, or there's no lack of alternatives. In the other question, I'll I'll pass over because that what are the biggest challenges that.
So there are some challenges, but many of them are normal. So, and we try to normalize that for families. So kids will want to know what my story. They're developing their identities as they go through life, and they're trying to figure out, how do I fit in both families? How does my past and my present going to meld together for my future? And so those are all normal processes that all human beings have to go through. Where did I come from, and who am I, and where am I going to go? But for people who've been through adoption, there's an added layer of that, because they may not be totally connected to one or the other, and they have to figure out how to blend both worlds together. So those are normal things, and there's very normal issues that would come up for an adoptive parent, a birth parent, and adoptees, and those relate to the issues of loss. So things like rejection, grief, intimacy, mastery and control. And Naz talked a bit about, her issues around this is you can't control some of these things. And so where does that play out in other areas of your life? Those are things that you need to pay attention to. But those are normal for the circumstances, and we try to educate people on that, to be aware of them and to look at them. And then there's other, for some children, there will be some other challenges that might come up because of their genetic history, because of the trauma they've experienced. And that's where we also try to educate parents as well. How can you help this child? You may have to parent some children differently. They're not going to respond the same way as, quotes, traditional parenting. They're going to need to connect differently. And they're going to need somebody to advocate for them in various places, either in childhood or throughout their life as well. Yes, too.
What I wanted to say, it's so true. Each child is very different. When we got our oldest one, he was 11 months and transitioned very easily, alhamdulillah. The second one was almost 14. He was 14 months when he came, and he struggled with the transition. That transition actually took over a month during visitations to slowly get him adjusted. And we saw the difference between the ages that, and it's not to say that, I don't think it's necessarily the age, but it was the child as well. That, some kids just take a little bit longer, and you're going to have to understand and be patient. It's scary, even as an adoptive parent. It's like, how do I help this child through this difficult transition? But it is also a difficult transition for a parent. So it's, it's fair to say that it's going to be a transition for both of you, and there's going to be ups and downs, and it's true, just get, as much support as possible from everyone and anyone, whether it's through these agencies or your family or friends, but being prepared mentally that it's not necessarily going to be a smooth ride. And then when we got my daughter, she came 6 months after we adopted our second one. And it was a huge transition for the family. For the kids, my two sons were trying to adjust to each other, and then we threw in a new one into the mix. So you could see them act out in different ways because they were just they were still young. At that time, they were 3, 2, and under 1. So they were really trying to adjust to each other. And you do. My daughter, I remember she was very young. She was 2.5 months, and she would cry. She wasn't colicky. And we were saying that we think this was during the transition period, a different sense. Just because she's a baby, it doesn't mean that, things aren't changing for her as well. And it could be scents and sounds and all of that. And I remember her crying, and it was overwhelming for me because I'm trying to comfort this little baby and not know what's wrong. So it's a huge, huge transition for them, and to be prepared for that. I think for post-adoption, be prepared that there's going to be ups and downs, and every single thing that happens, you're like, I wonder why this is happening. Is there a medical reason this is happening? Is there something that happened in the family's history, the biological family's history, that there's a reason that this is happening? So I think that post-adoption, it just almost never ends because there's always going to be questions that the child has or the transitions, and it's just ongoing. So almost just to mentally be prepared for that.
Yeah, if I can just quickly add just one thing as well, like, children who are in foster care or, who are eventually adopted, they do require special care, and they do face special challenges that birth children may not necessarily have to face. I remember one quick story that when we visited the foster family, I think of our second son, the two foster siblings, when he was in foster care, the two foster siblings were actually in the same room, so the cribs were right side by side. And when we adopted our son and brought him home, the foster mom would say, the other child would at night get up and look for him in the other crib, right, and want to know what happened, right? So they face those things, right? So that you have to understand that those are the challenges, and that's the backgrounds that they face, and you have to, as adoptive parents, you have to be able to help them through that and as best as possible.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan everyone for your inspiring questions. So this is actually it for our seminar. If you want to learn more about our upcoming seminars and programs as well as our weekly classes, please check out our website at seekershub.org/Toronto. That's seekershub.org/Toronto. Like I mentioned before, everything is free. I'd like to thank our guests. We really appreciate you coming here. Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to ask Shaykh Faraz to provide a closing dua, please. Oh, one last thing before we start, sorry. Okay, refreshments are at the back at this room over there. It's one room, so we're going to have the sisters go first, and then the brothers, inshallah, just because the brothers usually eat more than the sisters, so.
Alhamdulillah. Just one point as well. Another way with respect to adoption, and there's other related areas, is that as a young community, there are numerous areas of service, right, where there are great needs within our own community, just as there are in broader society. But as a young community, we have within our own Muslim community very limited social services, and for a lot of people, right, this is a huge opportunity. It's a challenge. It is off the beaten path, but it's not so off, because there are degrees in social work and this and that and so on, and it's an area where our community needs to invest both its financial resources, but also people need to invest that this is something, this is a challenge, this is an opportunity that I want to take on, and these are all communal obligations. You are rewarded for it with the reward of of doing something obligatory, and few people die of hunger. So if you're gonna have something to do in this life, might as well do something a little more meaningful than a lot of the stuff we engage in. So there's a great opportunity there that we should consider. And while there's guidelines that need to be upheld religiously, there is nothing there that should prevent someone who wants to consider adoption from doing so. Consult people you trust for religious guidance, so that you're clear and sure of how you would proceed. But none of it should be such that if you have whether the urge or the inclination, or you're seeking to gain this tremendous reward of of raising a child, that you should hold back from. So we ask Allah Almighty that He facilitate for us all the pathways of good, wherever they may be and whatever they may be, that He grant us the courage to make those choices that are pleasing to Him, that are of benefit to His creation, that bring happiness and joy in our own lives and in the lives of others, that we facilitate good for all that are around us in the best of ways. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. I've actually had early dibs on the snacks, so even if you need to leave, just take some as you go. I actually went in for seconds too.